The radio crackled. Static. Silence. Static again. John, a seasoned hunter of airwaves, scanned the frequencies. He loved the randomness of shortwave, the thrill of distant voices, the mystery of unknown signals. This night, however, was proving stubbornly quiet. He spun the tuning knob, searching for a blip, a voice, anything. The digital display flickered, numbers changing in rapid succession. John sighed, the familiar weight of disappointment settling in. Just as he was about to call it a night, a faint hum caught his ear. He stopped, his hand hovering over the dial. The hum intensified, resolving into a steady tone. John held his breath, listening intently. It wasn't a natural sound, not exactly. It felt intentional. He glanced at the frequency display, 89.1 megahertz, an odd frequency just outside the FM band. John grabbed his notepad, his pulse quickening. This was new, this was different, this was interesting. He jotted down the frequency, his eyes glued to the signal meter. The signal, though faint, held steady, a beacon in the vast emptiness of the radio spectrum. The voice, when it finally broke through the static, was flat, emotionless. A man, John thought, his voice distorted, almost robotic. He spoke in a series of numbers, each digit enunciated with chilling clarity. 7, 1, 3, 2, 9.
7, 1, 3, 2, 9.
John listened, transfixed. It was a number station, he realized, the kind intelligence agencies use to transmit coded messages, but this one felt different. The numbers, he noticed, were all primes. A code within a code? He scribbled the numbers furiously, his mind racing. What did they mean? Who was sending them? And why on this seemingly random frequency? Night after night, the voice returned, always at the same time, always with a new sequence of prime numbers. John became obsessed, his life revolving around the cryptic broadcasts. He researched number stations, prime number theory, anything that might offer a clue. The mystery deepened. The numbers followed no discernible pattern, no known code. John felt like he was standing in front of a locked door, the key tantalizingly out of reach. He had to know more. He had to find the source. The signal, John discovered, was maddeningly specific in its timing. Every night it began at precisely 3:17 a.m. and ended at 3:32 a.m. 15 minutes of chilling numbers, then silence. Why 3:17? Why 15 minutes? The questions gnawed at John, fueling his obsession. He upgraded his equipment, investing in a directional antenna, determined to triangulate the signal's origin. Weeks turned into months. John's apartment became a shrine to his obsession. Maps plastered on the walls, covered in circles and lines. His notes scattered everywhere like fallen leaves. Sleep became a luxury he could ill afford. He chased the signal, his antenna leading him on a merry chase across the city, the suburbs, even into the surrounding countryside. Each night the signal grew stronger, clearer, the voice more insistent, the numbers more urgent. John could feel it, sense it. The source was close, and with each passing night the static whispered a dark premonition, a growing unease in the pit of his stomach. He was nearing something sinister. The trail led him finally to the outskirts of town, to a crumbling edifice of brick and steel, half hidden by overgrown weeds and shrouded in an eerie silence. A faded sign, barely clinging to the rusted gate, proclaimed it WCTV Channel 8. The TV station had been abandoned for years, a victim of changing times and dwindling viewership. John stood before the dilapidated building, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. This was the source of the signal. He could feel it in his bones. He raised his antenna, pointing it towards the building, the signal meter on his receiver spiking into the red. He pushed open the gate, its hinges groaning in protest, and stepped onto the overgrown path leading to the main entrance. The air hung heavy and still, thick with the smell of decay and the weight of forgotten memories. John shivered, a sudden gust of wind whipping through the broken windows of the building, sounding like a mournful sigh. He reached into his backpack, his fingers closing around the cold steel of his heavy-duty flashlight. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. Section 5, The Ashes of Channel 8. The air inside was thick with dust and the smell of decay. The once bright studio, now cloaked in shadow and cobwebs, was a graveyard of broken dreams and shattered ambitions. John's flashlight beam danced across the room, illuminating remnants of a bygone era, a dusty camera on its tripod, a microphone dangling precariously from its stand, a control room frozen in time. He made his way through the debris-strewn hallways, his footsteps echoing eerily in the silence. The signal grew stronger with each step, the static almost deafening now. He could hear whispers in the static, faint and indistinct, like voices from beyond the grave. The hallway opened into what was once the main broadcasting room. A chill ran down John's spine. The air here felt different, heavier, charged with an unseen energy. He shone his flashlight around the room, his heart pounding in his chest. And that's when he saw it. In the center of the room, illuminated by John's flashlight beam, stood an old, charred microphone stand. It was twisted and blackened, a silent testament to some forgotten tragedy. As he stared at it, the whispers in the static grew louder, clearer.
Help, the fire trapped.
The voices were filled with terror, with pain, with a raw desperation that sent shivers down his spine. There'd been a fire, years ago, a tragic accident that claimed the lives of several station employees. He reached out, his fingers trembling slightly, and touched the charred microphone stand. A jolt, like static electricity, shot up his arm, and the voices in the static exploded in a cacophony of screams. John stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew then, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he was dealing with something beyond the realm of the explainable. John delved into the history of WCTV Channel 8. Newspaper archives painted a grim picture of the fire. It had started late one night during the late-night movie. A faulty wire, someone had said. An accident. But the voices in the static told a different story. They spoke of locked doors, of a fire that spread too quickly. They spoke of betrayal, of negligence, of a tragedy that could have been avoided. John learned about the victims, a young news anchor, a seasoned cameraman, a beloved weatherman, and a handful of behind-the-scenes technicians. Their faces, frozen in time in faded newspaper photographs, stared back at him, their eyes reflecting a shared terror. He felt a profound sadness for these forgotten souls, their final moments consumed by flames and fear. They were trapped, their voices silenced by the inferno, their stories untold, until now. The numbers, he now understood, were not a code. They were the date and time encoded in prime numbers of the fire that had consumed WCTV, a chilling timestamp of their final moments. Every night at 3:17 a.m., the same time the fire had started, their voices reached out desperate to be heard, to tell their story, to warn others of the unseen forces that lingered in this place.
John sat in his car outside the abandoned TV station, listening to the signal, the voices now a chorus of screams in his headphones. He could feel their pain, their terror, their anger. It was overwhelming, suffocating. The signal seemed to pulse now, beating like a heart, growing stronger, more insistent. He glanced at his watch, 3:16 a.m., 1 minute to go.
John knew he should leave, get away from this place, but he couldn't. He was drawn to it, compelled by a force he didn't understand. He was a prisoner of his own curiosity, trapped in a web of his own making. 3:17 a.m. The voices in the static reached a fever pitch, a deafening cacophony of screams and pleas. John gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white, and then something strange happened. The signal, no longer confined to the radio, began to bleed into the real world. The car radio, though switched off, crackled to life, the dashboard lights flickering erratically. John's heart pounded in his chest.
He felt a cold hand on his neck, a whisper of icy breath against his ear. He could smell the smoke, feel the heat of the flames, hear the screams all around him. The car, no longer his sanctuary, became a prison. The air grew thick with the stench of burning flesh and the acrid tang of ozone. John gasped for breath, his lungs burning, his vision blurring at the edges. He was caught in the grip of something powerful, something ancient and malevolent, and it wasn't letting go.
John, his senses overwhelmed, his mind on the verge of collapse, could only watch in horror as a figure began to materialize in the passenger seat beside him. It was the young news anchor, her face contorted in a silent scream, her body flickering like a badly tuned television set. Her eyes, wide with terror, locked onto his. Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear but understood with chilling clarity.
Don't trust the frequency.
And then as quickly as it began, it was over. The figure vanished, the oppressive atmosphere lifted, the smell of smoke dissipating like a bad dream. John was left trembling in his seat, his body slick with cold sweat, his mind reeling. He fumbled for the ignition, his hands shaking uncontrollably, and started the car. As he pulled away from the abandoned TV station, The faintest of whispers reached him, carried on the wind, a final, chilling message from beyond the grave.
Warn them all?
John never returned to the old TV station. He couldn't. The memory of that night, the terror, the faces of the dead, haunted his waking hours. He sold his radio equipment, unable to bear the sight of it. But the signal, the voices, continued to haunt him. He heard them in the white noise between stations, in the hum of electrical appliances, in the silence of his own thoughts. He couldn't escape it. John knew what he had to do. He had to warn others. He wrote it all down, every chilling encounter. Avoid 89.1 MHz. The dead are listening. John hoped, prayed even, that it would be enough. Some doors are best left unopened, some frequencies best left unexplored, because the dead, once disturbed, are not easily silenced.